What's up guys, I'm Thyron and welcome back to the making of my brand new track called Destiny.
This is your destiny.
Alright, so we've seen the vocal, the melody and the break. And now we go to the most important part in hardstyle, the kick drum. This is the kick that I've used in the first melodic drop. And this is the kick that I used in the second one. The first thing that I'm doing if I'm working on a melody is to put a kick underneath and make sure that the kick tail sounds nice on all notes, that it just pitches up nicely and it fits in the whole vibe that you're trying to go for. So this is nimble kick. This is what I often use to pitch my kicks, and this is what the kick sounded like without any effects on. However, I only needed the kick tail from this because I was not planning on using the punch. So I used a shaper box to get rid of the punch. I used Oxford inflator to just limit the tail a little bit. And I used a linear phase EQ before bouncing it to audio. Then I decided to check if there are any kick punches that will work really well with this tail and with this melody. So eventually I found that the punch from the hardstyle way was actually pretty nice for this track. And this is what it sounds like. So that was pretty much the kick drum for the main part already. It was fairly easy, but I made some different kicks for the mid-intro and the final drop, so I'll show you those as well. First we're going to look at the FX kicks that I made, which you can hear in between some of the main kick drums when the melody is playing. So this is what it sounds like solo. And here I've still got the FX chain that I used to make them. So without any effects, it's just a basic kick. What I always first do is I put on a heavy distortion. In this case I use filter bank. Now filter bank also emits this kind of static noise, so I put on a gate afterwards to just suppress the noise when the kick is not playing. Then before filter bank I'm working with a camel fat, which is a really nice distortion for these kind of kicks because it has a bunch of filters in there and a distortion unit, and just an easy way to work on these kind of sounds. So here I cranked up the distortion, I put on a low pass filter with the cutoff turned down and the resonance turned up, and I decided to use another band pass filter to really bring out the character of the FX kick. Then I added another EQ in front of this just to fine tune the sound of the distortion. Next up we're going to take a look at the mid-intro drop, for which I created a different kick and a bunch of screeches.
This is your destiny. This is your destiny.
So obviously the most important element of this drop is the kick drum. For this I actually used the kick from the main Climax drop. Let's start off with the kick punch. I've had to bounce this one down to audio because, as with the vocal and the melody, there were just so many layers with compression and distortion going on that it was really difficult for my PC to handle it all in the same project. What I remember about making this kick punch is that I discovered how cool it can sound to create a duplicate of your punch and pitch it down an octave. Of course you have some quality loss when you pitch it down that much. So I put on another distortion and another EQ in front of it. It just came together really nicely. I mixed it in there. The result was really nice, much better than only the high punch, which can sound a little bit thin in your mix. And this just really helps fill it up. So for the tail, I actually based this on the tail for the main kick drum, but it just didn't really flow well with the kick punch and the screeches that were on top of it. So I decided to change it up a little bit. So this is the original tail without effects. And together with the punch, it just does not work as well as I wanted it to. It's a little bit too messy. So I added another distortion and then I used an EQ in front of it, just to remove a little bit of the frequencies that I was annoyed with in the distortion. Now of course that sounds way too loud, but in the next EQ I'm going to fix this because I am removing a lot of mid frequencies. I'm also boosting the lows a little bit because these can get lost when you're distorting stuff. This is how it fits together now. So I would say it's still not there yet, but it's definitely getting better. And even though the tail in itself might sound ridiculous, it sounds a lot better together with the kick punch, and especially later when we add the Screeches on top. So here I've added 2 shaper box plugins, and I've just used this to free up the kick punch because when you use distortion, especially with an EQ in front of it, you can get a little bit messy right after the input signal ends. And then the second shaper box is actually a trick that I discovered last year, because I had no idea that with shaper box you could actually create several bands. And so I decided to create a volume automation, but only on the higher part of the frequency spectrum. But this is what it sounds like now. So as you can hear, it sounds a lot cleaner already. And now let's have a look at how it sounds together with the Screech on top. I think it's safe to say that this kick is nailed. It's fine like this for the mid-intro. There's one more little thing I want to show you, because the kick at the end of the mid-intro drop is a little bit different, and this is what it sounds like. So this is one of my signature sounds that I've used in my tracks for over the past few years. And the way that I do this is basically just I create a pitch envelope in the tail of the kick. And sometimes I put a distortion afterwards as well. So let's have a listen to what it sounds like without any of the other sounds. Now it may seem absolutely ridiculous to have a kick tail that pitches from up to down. It makes no sense at all, but as long as there's no melody, there's really nothing wrong with it. And I found that when you play this at the dance floor, it always sounds good, because no matter what frequency range the sound system can handle at that particular club, when you pitch the kick tail from up to down, it pretty much reaches all the frequencies. So it pretty much comes through on every single sound system out there. So I will quickly show you how I would create a kick tail like this. And this is the technique that I've used for a long time now. And I'm going to use Melodyne, which is a vocal pitching software. And I've actually always pitched my kicks with this until I found Nimble Kick, but I still use it to create this kind of pitch down kicks. So here we have the kick tail loaded into Melodyne. I will make sure that it's on melodic algorithm. So we're just going to drag this down, and I will just create like a little bend downwards. This is pretty much how I create these kind of kick tails. If you're just doing a kick drop and you want something crazy like this, just give it a try. It can also be really cool to put a distortion afterwards and then use an EQ before the distortion to like kind of see if you can trigger some weird movement in the tail, because it will react completely different compared to just a straight pitch kick. Now let's take a look at the screeches. So these are the screech sounds that I made for this track. I've also had to bounce these ones down to audio because they're from the virus. Luckily, it's nothing special anyway. These are just some detuned saw waves with distortion on them, a phaser, and a lot of heavy pitch bending. So I will show you the processing that I've used on this sound. This is what it sounds like without effects. This sounds pretty good already because it's from the virus. I've used some internal processing there, and it just makes it sound pretty tight without any external effects. Still, I wanted to use a little extra compression to get that snappy sound again. I've used some sidechaining. I used a low cut just to make sure to get rid of any low frequency. And again, the pull tag plugin to boost the high frequencies a little bit. Then finally, I send it to the reverb bus, where again I'm sidechain compressing the dry signal to the reverb so that it ducks away as soon as the screech starts playing. Now in the breaks and before the end of the drop, you can hear a couple of parts where I change the screech a little bit. So here we have a heavily stretched screech, which is right before the end of the drop.
It's your destiny!
And for this one, it was really just stretching for me. It's as simple as that. I chose the solo algorithm for the time stretching because I feel like it sounds really good when you're stretching stuff heavily. And I set it to 0.26. And that was pretty much it already. Then in the break, I have a different kind of sound. For this one, I actually first pitched the screech down. I stretched it. And then I had to bounce it so that I could again pitch it up with the solo algorithm on. This is what it sounds like without any external processing. This is how I process it with distortion and EQ. It's just a sound used in the background of a break, and it's not something that comes into your face or anything like that, but it creates a nice atmosphere. So next I filtered it out a little bit, put some compression on top, sidechained it, put on a low cut just to get rid of those low frequencies, and used a pancake, which is a panning plugin, and this automates the pan to the left and the right. And that was it for the screeches. Next we're going to move on to the breakdown before the final drop. Originally for this breakdown I copy pasted the hip hop break that I showed you earlier, but later on I decided to change it up and create a big orchestral part. And this is what it sounds like.
No need to lose hope, don't let it get you down. Be the king of your story, live up to the crown. Strive for greatness, make sure to leave a legacy. Live your dreams, this is your destiny.
So as you can hear, this is definitely different from the rest of the track, and it adds another layer to the story that we're telling here. It's a lot more dramatic in the beginning, but then after the big orchestra comes in, it just feels so epic and it fits perfectly to the vocal and the message we're trying to send. I've had to bounce down a lot of this stuff because all these instruments were from Contact and Omnisphere, and it was just way too much for this project to handle. So I actually made it in a different project and then bounced it and added it on top in this project. What you will see in the chord progression here is that these are the same chords as in the main melody, but these are way stretched out. So each chord is actually 2 times as long as in the main melody. It was a little bit more dramatic, and I didn't want this part to feel too light because I just wanted to have this epic orchestral feeling like you're standing on top of the world, you know? So this is what all the instruments sound like. And on top of all that, I decided to put the original melody in a string also, because this keeps it connected to the rest of the track as well, instead of feeling like a completely different part. To support this epic part, I also wanted to have some percussion, and one of the signature sounds in my tracks are the war drums. I've used them in so many projects, and for this one I found some new loops and samples to play around with. Next up I will show you guys the build up towards the drop. And I don't think there's anything really spectacular going on here, but still I think it might be interesting for you guys to see what happens here and how I approach building up the right intensity and creating room for the drop to really have an impact.
This is your destiny.
But let's first look at the percussion in my build-up. I've got a normal clap here, and I've layered this with a crowd clap. I took this clap from a different track of mine, so the processing is already on it. A little bass drum here in the build-up. I'm filtering it away towards the end. So once again, I've used the endless smile. In this case, I went with no limit because it also takes away some of the low end. And for this bass drum, I just really wanted to remove that low end towards the end of the build-up so that the kick drum can have some extra impact. Next up is a snare drum, and I've also bounced this down to audio because I had it in a sampler originally to pitch it up towards the end of the build. But basically what I used on the snare was some compression to make it really snappy, an endless smile to build up the reverb, and an automation on the pitch of the snare. So this is what it sounds like. I have a crash at the beginning of the build-up just to put some extra emphasis there. And I have this little stereo support that just helps create some rhythm in the build-up and create some extra drive. Right before the melody comes in, I've made this little drum fill, and I've also included a couple of FX kicks here, which just really creates a nice and unique support to the vocal here. As for the instruments in the build-up section, I wanted to continue the atmosphere that was built by the epic orchestra part, so I decided to put in some strings in the build-up as well. Next to those strings, there are a couple of small instruments that are just helping to build up the drive. And here I have a couple of my main leads filtered to introduce the melody back in after that orchestral break. Lastly, I used a couple of sweeps and rises from my previous tracks as well. And this is how it sounds together.
This is your destiny.
Alright guys, I'm gonna wrap it up for this video. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope you find it enjoyable to watch. And make sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Let me know if there's anything else you want to learn from me in the future. And please like and subscribe because this would really help me to get my channel out there. And I definitely want to keep making this kind of content. So please let me know. If you like this track, make sure to stream it loud and add it to your playlist. And I'll see you in the next one.